Peace and love, family. Welcome back to the Hope Helping Our People Elevate YouTube channel, where you get those podcasts, interviews, study classes, and more. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. If you're a returner, as I always say, I appreciate you for checking out the content, helping me build this platform. But we know we got to deal with them five divine principles: love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, based for life, birthrights, and nationality. And so, as I always say, you got the sponsors of our investigative research committee. And so today we're going to go into the theories of race part 2, and I'll dive into more Europeans who followed or the continuation of François Bernier's race ideology. So this is going to be 105 years after the 1684 New Division of the Earth, according to the different races of men who inhabited it, by François Bernier. And so, like I said, without holding y'all, we're going to jump straight into it. Peace and love, family.
On behalf of Akuno Sanko for Bay, you know what I'm saying? Jay, where you at? We're trying to help our people elevate. Hope. H-O-P-E. We're giving them hope. We doing what we gotta do, you know. Every day, one step at a time, man. We gonna make it happen. Helping our people elevate. Sometimes I practice focused thought and meditate. I'm trying to come with other ways to help our people elevate and seeking knowledge, make me levitate. The lifted mental state is what results from how we orchestrate. This for the family's sake. Let's self-reflect and self-evaluate. And every day, make sure the steps you take, you calculate. Receive a master's fate. I know I can't exist without the hate, but that's okay. I balance that with higher self today. Success is on this way, and after that, my flesh can pass away.
Okay, so like I said, family, we're going to be talking about the continuation of François Bernier 105 years later. We're going to talk about Kames, Long, Goldsmith, Hunter, Jennings, Jefferson, Bernier, Smith, and more. Lord Kames, Sketches of the History of Man of 1774-75, Oliver Goldsmith, of the Varieties of the Human Race, 1774, Edward Long, The History of Jamaica, 1774, John Hunter, An Inaugural Dissertation on the Varieties of Man, 1775, Thomas Jefferson's Note on the State of Virginia, 1781, Soam Jennings on the Chain of the Universal Being, 1782, Johann Goldenfred von Herder's Outline of the Philosophy of the History of Man, and we'll continue. But there's a quote that I want to recite that I recited in the last one by Philip K. Dick. The manipulation of reality is the manipulation of words. If you can control the meaning of the word, you can control the people who must use them. And so my question becomes, is with the controlling of the language, so if you have tens of millions of people who think their skin tone and pigmentation is a color, where did this type of thinking come from? Again, 1684, the present, 339 years later, 2024, people who identify themselves or their shade or their hue, their skin tone and pigmentation with color. Why not nationality? Lord Kames, or Henry Holmes. Henry Holmes, or Lord Kames as he became known, was a Scottish jurist historian and moral philosopher with connections to David Hume, James Boswell, Thomas Reid, Adam Smith, and others leading figures in the Scottish Enlightenment, not all of whom held him in high esteem. Like them, he was an exceptionally industrious and variously talented man with wide-ranging interests, many of which he explored in his magnum opus. This massive text was ultimately became the 4th volume of Sketches of the History of Man, which Kames describes in a letter of the first comprehensive history of the human race and its gradual progress towards maturity. In this work, Kames deployed an immense number of examples and instances in support of the general idea that virtue was natural to man and that human history was a chronicle of progress from savagery to civilization. Kames divided his work into 3 sections: progress of man independent of society, progress of man in society, and progress of science, to which he added a 4th volume on the principle and progress of morality. Kames began his largely descriptive work with a preliminary discourse concerning the origin of men and of languages, a speculative account of human origins characterized by what he describes in a preface as probable reasoning, which is not a little slippery. In this discourse, Kames advances the controversial notion that the various tribes or groups of mankind were divergent descendants of Adam and Eve and constituted distinct groups of races that have been deposited in the various environments by their deity or providence, where Buffon, Montesquieu, and others had attributed human differences primary to climate. Kames argued the reverse, that various groups have been placed in different climates by divine agency and endowed with the attributes needed to flourish there. The task, Kames said, was one of describing every animal according to its kind, as Adam, our first parent, did. Since such a disposition was not recorded in the Bible, Kames could only reconcile it with the Christian faith by referring to the scattering of people after the catastrophe of the Tower of Babel. In doing so, Kames nicely split the difference between monogenous and polygynous by making the various races the result of divine punishment rather than separate creation, although Keynes did use the phrase local creation to describe Australians and American Indians. According to Keynes, the races once deposited in their environments and effectively recreated began their particular accents up the ladder of progress. Keynes noted differences in the accents, but refused to rank races, explaining an apparent inferiority of the Negro in understanding as an effect of their condition and making a greater allowance of the equality of the innate capacity than some others, including Thomas Jefferson. Oliver Goldsmith. Oliver Goldsmith, an Anglo-Irish novelist, poet, and playwright, and an acquaintance, if not intimate, of Samuel Johnson, James Boswell, and others at London's Literary Society, published an immense multi-volume work entitled A History of the Earth and Animated Nature, in which he undertook a complete account of the planet and all the living things that inhabited it. In the second volume, on animals, following discourse on sleep, hunger, seeing, and hearing, and before taking up such subjects as monsters, mummies, zebras, roebucks, and quadrupeds of the hog kind, Goldsmith placed an essay assessing the advantages which man had over men and the various kinds with which our earth is inhabited. This 25-page essay of the varieties in the human race represents the first extended treatment of race, a term he uses interchangeably with variety by a major English literary figure. So as y'all see, I'm showing y'all where they're starting to use this term race. Oh, this is the first time they use this term for this. This is the first time they use the term for that. Well, this is a continuation of Francis Bernier's 1684 New Division of the Earth according to the different races of men who inhabited it. And so prior to 1684, there was no such concept as race, black, white, red, yellow, brown people, orange people, green people, blue people. There was no colored people. Goldsmith identified 6 races, each associated with a particular region. The polar region, including the Laplanders, Esquimaux, Samoyeds, Tartars, Greenlanders, all of whom are short, equally rude, superstitious, and stupid. Excellent hunters and exceptionally hardy, these people are absurdly proud and fitted by nature to endure the rigors of their situation. The Tartar race, found in Asia, including China and Japan. These are known by their general ugliness, and especially their flat noses, enormous teeth, and small eyes placed in some of them, 5 or 6 inches asunder. Tartars have no decency and are chiefly robbers. Southern Asiatics, including Indians. They come to physical maturity early, with 8-year-old girls conceiving children with their 10-year-old husbands. Indians have long been remarkable for their cowardice and effeminacy, as proven by the fact that their attempted invasion of their land has succeeded. They bragging about taking the land from the quote-unquote Indians. So, that's what we get. Africans. This gloomy race of mankind is found to blacken all of the southern parts of Africa, from 18 degrees north of the line to its extreme termination at the Cape of the Good Hope. Goldsmith focuses on women's breasts, which, after bearing one child, hang down below their navel, and it's customary with them to suckle the child at their backs by throwing their breast over their shoulders. As their persons are thus naturally deformed, at least to our imagination, their minds are equally incapable of strong exertions. The climate seems to relax their mental power still more than those of the body. They are therefore, in general, found to be stupid, indolent, and mischievous. Americans who, surprisingly, are nearly all the same color regardless of where they live. All these savages seem to be cowardly, Goldsmith says. They seldom are known to face their enemies in the field, but fall upon them at the advantages of the greatness of their fears serve to increase the rigors of their cruelty. Also, they all have a serious air, although they seldom think. Goldsmith concludes with a generalization that savages in every country are almost the same. A wild, independent, and precarious life produced a peculiar train of virtues and vices, and patience and hospitality, indolence and rapacity, content and sincerity, are found not less among the natives of America than all the various nations of the globe. Europeans, including Asia Minor and Northern Africa, who generally agree in their color of their bodies, the beauty of their complexion, the largeness of their limbs, and the vigors of their understanding, those arts which might have had their inventions among other races, mankind have come to perfection there. So he's saying everybody was perfected in Europe once they got to Europe. They don't talk about the more civilized in Europe, but let's keep going. Edward Long, a colonial administrator whose family had lived on the island of Jamaica since the English defeated the Spanish in 1665, compiled a massive 3-volume account of the island's history, geography, economy, governance, and social structure from 1665 to 1774. This work was the first and for over 200 years the standard Anglophone history of the island, and stands as a monument to the colonial historiography as well as a testament to Jamaican prosperity and confidence. For more recent readers, much of this interest in the text derives from Long's vigorously phrased reflection of the Negroes who were brought to the island as slaves after many of the original inhabitants had been killed by the Spanish or by the disease brought to the Spanish to which they had no immunity. Slaves were indispensable to the island's economy, which was driven by a European demand for cotton, sugarcane, tobacco, and other crops. As a slave owner on the Caribbean plantation island and a member of the Creole elite on the island, Long, who had been educated in England before moving to Jamaica at the age of 24, had a particular interest in the subjects of race. Indeed, part of his defense of slavery grows out of his experience managing a large number of slaves beyond his personal experience. However, Long took on a theoretical interest in the subject. Conserving with advanced social and philosophical discourse in Europe, Long was keenly aware of the moral considerations, scientific conclusions, and theoretical distinctions pertaining to slavery that were current in advanced European intellectual culture at the time. Conserving with the work of Buffon, Hume, Voltaire, and many others, Long derived from his reading the conceptual resources he needed to justify and defend the practice of chattel slavery on the basis of racial ontology. That go to like any slave movie you ever seen when they always reading. They always have books in their hand. The European would always be on the plantation. What do you think they were reading? What are these books? These were these authors that we talking about here. These authors on this concept of race, or they justify the Bible. They used the Bible to justify what they were doing. This is what was taking place: the dehumanizing and denationalizing of the indigenous people across the globe. John Hunter, a man of whom little was known, John Hunter was a British Army physician, sometimes called the father of scientific surgery, who attempted in the text to summarize almost everything which all the curious investigators of the planet have seen and told. He published his works in Edinburgh in 1775, shortly before Blumenbach published his work celebrated on the natural varieties of mankind. Hunter's work, called an inaugural disputation in the table of contents, but an inaugural dissertation in the text, was, in the moment, eclipsed, but was reprinted in the 1865 English translation of Blumenbach's anthropological treatise. Hunter's dissertation is notable for the stringent naturalism of its exposition, its insistence on fertility as a criterion of species membership, and its conclusion that humanity constitutes a single species in all respects, confirming the conclusions of Buffon. Because Hunter's expository style is often diffuse and somewhat ponderous, a precise will take the place of a selection. Hunter organizes his discourse with sections on color, statue and form, excess or defective parts, and mental faculties. With respect to color, he provided a table of colors, including black, sub-black, copper-colored, red, brown, light brown, and white, each one paired with the geographical areas in which the color is primarily found, thus black or African, under the direct ray of the sun, along with inhabitants of New Guinea and New Batavia. Sub-black, the Moors of northern Africa and Hottentots. We mentioned Moors. So this is 1775, and he's talking about Moors. And so he's placing Moors in the category of black, so-called black folk. But let's continue. Copper-colored East Indians, which he's talking about, Moors as well. Let's continue. Red, American Indian, Moors as well. Brown, Moor. All this is Moors, but we're going to keep it just brown. Tartars, Persians, Arabs, Northern Africans, and Chinese. Light brown. Southern Europeans, Sicilians, Abyssinians, Spanish, Turks, Samoyeds, and Laplanders. And then white, almost all remaining Europeans. So everything that wasn't of copper complexion was black African, sub-black, copper-colored, red, brown, light brown. And then everything of Caucasian descent was classified as white. According to Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, and y'all can look up the etymology of Caucasian, you'll see Johann Friedrich Blumenbach's name in the definition. So don't take my word for it, go look it up yourself. Thomas Jefferson, the most infamous statement on race in the 18th century was composed by the same man who wrote the Declaration of Independence. As this fact alone would suggest, Thomas Jefferson is one of the most complex and paradoxical figures in American history. A man of enormous breadth of learning and interest, who possessed one of the most spacious and cosmopolitan minds in the world at the time. Jefferson grasped the radical nature of egalitarian democracy before many others, and in the Declaration gave democracy its most majestic articulation, stating as self-evident the fact that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so this is 1771. He's saying that all men are created equal by their creator and certain inalienable rights. So what happened to our inalienable rights? And then who are these different creators that created all men? Jefferson was also farsighted in his sense of what he saw as an inevitable consequence of a failure to abolish slavery in a new country, a slave rebellion that would, as he said, as an inquiry notes in the state of Virginia, end in the extermination of one or the other race. Nothing he wrote to John Adams in 1822 is more certainly written in the book of fate than that these people are to be free, and yet Jefferson, in many respects so remarkable, was in others entirely conventional, a fact nowhere more in evidence than in the notes in his only book. Notes is an amazingly detailed inventory of the resources and attributes of the state of Virginia, as well as a deeply personal statement of philosophical and moral convictions concerning education, crime, and punishment, agriculture, government, the separation of church and state, and most famously, race and slavery. Soames Jennings, 1704 to 1787, a London born politician, man of wealth, and writer, Soames Jennings was not an original thinker, but for that reason, his writings are often excellent guides to the received wisdom of that time. The author of The Art of Dancing and Miscellanies, Jennings occasionally addressed weightier subjects such as the taxation without representation of the American colonies and the origins of evil, this last effort reproducing a contemptuous reboot from Samuel Johnson. As Wendell Jordan describes the post-classical application of the concept, it served to dramatize the Christian view of man as a creature with divine soul. It served to formulate man's vogue sense of the beasts within themselves and their capacity for raising above bestiality. It served to satisfy the 18th century ravenous appetite for hierarchical principles in the face of social upheaval, and it served as a powerful means of organizing the fact of the natural world. As Jordan points out, the chains of being acquired a new pertinence in many discussions on race, a subject that was coming to encompass virtually all of the above considerations, where it served to naturalize and justify the hierarchy of races, as Jennings does with an almost casual introduction of the Hottentots at the opposite end of the human spectrum that extended from the Nadir all the way up to the Bacon and the Newton and beyond. Into the heavens, like Long, Jennings regards the Hottentot as such a low and compromised instance of humanity that the difference between them and the highest primates is not easily discerned or described. Johann Gottfried von Herder of 1744 to 1803. Johann Gottfried von Herder is a figure of majestic dimensions in the history of philosophy, exerting a major, even decisive influence of many leading figures in the century that followed him: Hegel, Schleiermacher, Nietzsche, Goethe, Mill, Goethe, and contributing to the development of several entire disciplines: philosophy of language, linguistics, hermeneutics, anthropology, biblical scholarship. In his few comments on race, which occur in the middle of spacious discussion of the earth of humanity. The first section is entitled, Our Earth is a Star Among Stars, where Herder places human diversity in the context of natural diversity, with the entirety governed by a uniform system of laws dominated by principles of opposition and reconciliation. Herder argues that humanity should be divided into people rather than into distinct races because, as he puts it, the whole of humankind is engaged in a continuing metamorphosis such that complexions run into each other. For Herder, human differences are attributable largely to the effect of climate and geography on an organism restricted by nature to a limited number of possible variations. Sections in the Book 6 of Outlines on the Organization of Various People precede more general reflections in the Book 7, which begins with a programmatic statement whose title states the argument, notwithstanding the varieties of the human form, there is but one of the same species of man throughout the whole of our earth. Herder's views of the primacy of people, ethnic groups living together, was cited in the early 20th century by Franz Boas in his efforts to orient anthropology away from race. John Pinkerton of 1758 to 1826. John Pinkerton was a poet, an antiquarian, an industrious but idiosyncratic scholar, a geographer, and an Anglophile Scotsman. Controversial and even dismissed in his time and subsequently, Pinkerton still commands interest for the way in which he united three emerging subjects: language, race, and, to a lesser extent, national identity. In the late 18th century, the historical study of language was becoming an exceptionally ambitious intellectual project as scholars sought to recover traces of primordial Euro language of the system species by posting earlier languages that had left traces or deposits in subsequent languages. The recovery of Proto-Indo-European, the language presumably spoken by a hypothetical Neolithic group of Eurasians, became the ultimate goal of linguistic scholars who became masters of Euridic inference. Pinkerton's second major concern, race, was beginning to draw the attention of serious thinkers who sought to understand human diversity as part of the project of coming to grip with the deepest mysteries of the human conditions in scientific, rational, and non-theological terms. Pinkerton rejects family of man conceptions in the favor of hard racial division and even for separate creation, evidence for which was, he asserted, provided by ancient languages. So far from all nations being descended from one man, Pinkerton had written in an essay on the origins of Scottish poetry, published the year before his dissertation, there are many races of men of quite different forms and attributes. Moreover, to suppose all races of men descended from a parent is as absurd as to suppose to an ass may become a horse or an orangutan. Samuel Stanhope Smith, founder of Hampden-Sydney College, president of Princeton, recipient of honorary degree from Harvard and Yale, and prominent cleric in the Presbyterian Church, Samuel Stanhope Smith was also a progressive in many ways, espousing liberal views on marriage, slavery, and religion. He was president of Princeton from 1795 to 1812, when the college trustees, alarmed by the introduction of physics and chemistry into the curriculum of a college that had been devoted to the training of Presbyterian ministries, forced his resignation. Among Smith's achievements was a text written as an address to the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia when he was a young professor at Princeton, an essay on the causes of variety of complexions and figures in the human species, 1787, which secured his recognition as an anthropologist. In this essay, Smith asserted and celebrated the unity of the human race against those who, like Keynes, had argued for theories of heritable racial distinction and polygenes, and took extended issue with Thomas Jefferson's view on the capacities of black people. In 1810, Smith published a new edition of his work that was thoroughly revised and nearly doubled in length, and included an extended refutation of Charles White and Keynes, as well as a vivid essay of the savagism of the American Indian. For Smith, the notion of a fixed racial hierarchy, or even the concept of a racial distinction, contradicted both the Bible and true philosophy, and violated the principles of a common human nature for which the American Revolution had been fought. Such differences as were commonly recognized were, he said, simply differences of complexion to which a host of moral, intellectual, and cultural capacities had been legitimately and unnecessarily attached. So he understood that this whole race paradigm was based on skin complexion and the differences in people's complexions. Christopher Bernier, 1747 to 1810, a less celebrated but remarkably productive colleague of Blumenbach's at Göttingen, Christopher Bernier sought to link biology and ethnography, merging racial and historical differences in a way that, methodologically, primitive proved to be extraordinarily influential in the science of history, human science, devoted to ideas rejected by some of his most distinguished contemporaries, including Blumenbach and Kant. Bernier, who may have been the first writer to use the term Caucasian, argued that races could be distinguished, characterized, and ranked. Among his vast list of writings are a history of the female sex, a history of class inequity, and a description of ancient monuments in all parts of the world. His prosperous reputation rests, however, very largely on his Outline of the History of Mankind, 1785, where Blumenbach allowed that Caucasians were the most beautiful variety according to our idea of beauty. Bernier took Caucasian beauty and non-Caucasian ugliness not as judgment, but as facts from which other facts of a different order follow. Bernier's scholarly approach encompassed a broad range of physical, moral, cultural, and historical factors, but his conclusions tend towards a brutal clarity. So in their eyes, if you were not of Caucasian descent, you were considered ugly. Sir William Jones, a supporter of the American Revolution, a colonial judge, and a scholar of Middle Eastern and Indian culture and history, Sir William Jones was one of the most learned men of his time, with particularly impressive achievements in linguistics. He founded the Asiatic Society in Calcutta, to which he gave annual addresses reporting on his research. In a third of these, on the Hindus, he proposed a dramatic expansion and deepening on the inquiry into the past through the historical study of language. Specifically, he argued that linguistic evidence suggested a common origin for Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, and now lost tongue or family of tongues that will come to be called Proto-Indo-European. In a passage that has become justifiably famous, he argued that the Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either, yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity, both in the roots of verbs and in the forms of grammar, than could possibly have been produced by accident. So strong indeed that no philosopher could examine them all three without believing them to have sprung from one common source, which perhaps no longer exists. So he was saying that all the languages came from one language, and then it became Proto-Indo-European, or PI. The PI root words you see in the dictionaries, Proto-Indo-European. For all of his originalities, Jones did not question either the legitimacy of British colonial rule or the biblical account of creation. Indeed, he relied explicitly on those parts of the Old Testament attributed to Moses, a text more than human in its origin. The Bible's accounts of a single prayer, the flood, and the Tower of Babel registered for Jones incontrovertible truths, possibly expressed in figurative language, on the basis of which he posited three great families or races derived from Noah's posterity: the Indian, the Arabian, and the Tartarian, with other groups constituting subcategories of these. In a breathtaking act of speculation, Jones argued that the people of the world are proceeded from some central country, which he placed in the region of the Caucasus. The evidence derived from the study of ancient language suggests, Jones said, that Iran was the birthplace of humanity. In the ninth of his discourses, passages of which are reproduced here, Jones developed the implications of his research for the study of human races. Jones used the term loosely, referring both to the race of man and particular races, the first race of Indians, second race of Arabians, consisting of Jews and Arabs, and the third race of Tartarians or Asians. Jones' suggestion about the implications of potentialities of linguistics was eagerly, but not unquestionably or particularly taken up by other researchers, including Friedrich and August Wilhelm Siegel, Franz Bopp, Wilhelm von Humboldt, Jacob Grimm, and Max Muller. Through their works, linguistics became an historical science devoted to the recovery of the earliest thought structures of the human race. For Jones, the term Aryan referred in the first instance to Iran, but as one scholar has written, the term also stood for unity and shared origins, notably the common inheritance of the Indians and British. Benjamin Rush, 1745 to 1813. Few figures concentrate the contradictions of the American situation with respect to race at the time of the Revolution more efficiently and powerfully than Benjamin Rush. Signer of the Declaration, veteran of the Revolution, prominent abolitionist, founder of Dickinson College, humanitarian, friend of Thomas Jefferson, physician, advocate of education for women, and leader of the American Enlightenment, Rush was one of the most prominent and admired citizens of the new republic, and in the same year the Declaration was signed, he purchased a slave whom he still owned in 1784 when he joined the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society. Benjamin Rush's views on the Negro were not without issue. While Rush believed that the innate equality of blacks, he also sought to discover the medical reason behind their dark complexions, and did so in ways that were problematic. Historian Mark M. Smith Finley documents Rush's most controversial opinion surrounding race, the idea that black skin was a form of leprosy. Smith quotes and addresses the American Philosophical Society given by Rush in the 1790s, in which the physician made some troubling claims. Rush argued that the Negro was black because of his environment, taken to include diet, customs, and diseases, had led to a high incidence of leprosy. Their skin itself, not innately, mind you, but because of the leprosy, a peculiar and disagreeable smell, which I can compare to nothing but the smell of a mortified limb. So this European says that we got our dark skin because of leprosy. And on that, I apologize it took me so long to put this together. Y'all don't know how long I'm doing all this by myself, but I appreciate y'all for being patient with me. I appreciate y'all helping me build this platform up. If you like this content, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment. I have part 3 coming up real soon. If I like this, like I said, make sure you leave a comment, hit that like button. If you have any questions or if this is new information for you, leave a comment. I'll catch you on the next one, family. Peace and love.